How to mix and produce with purpose by using references. Many producers think using references means copying someone else. The truth is that references are a powerful tool to improve your mixes and your productions. In this video, I'll share what I've learnt from using references over the last 25 tracks that I've mixed. I'll explain why references matter, how to choose the right ones, and how to use them effectively without losing your originality. So why don't producers use references? Producers I've talked to have come up with lots of reasons why they don't or they struggle to use references, and here's just a few. I've tried using references, but I'm confused about what to do. This track is doing my head in. I'm confused about what I'm supposed to be doing, and I just keep going down rabbit holes. And I don't use references because they'll take away from my originality. Okay, so we know that some people find it confusing and difficult, so let's talk about the reasons why using references can be helpful. It's really important to get your ears tuned in before you start work. So much like wearing shades, your ears can get really confused really quickly by a tonality. So let me put this track on. Right, so that's how it sounds to you. But this is how it should sound. Now, doesn't that sound wrong? Now, you'd got used to it sounding really bright, but it sounded bright because I'd put that EQ curve on it, but you couldn't see. So your ears get tricked. So that's why references are really important. So one great way to use references is to have a playlist or a few tracks that you listen to before you get stuck into working on yours. This is especially important if you're working somewhere that you're unfamiliar with, say on different speakers or monitors. The second thing about this is that maintaining consistency is important, and so pre-listening ear alignment really helps with that consistency. Another example of where references are super helpful is if you're trying to explain to somebody else what you want to achieve. So for example, if you're working with a mastering engineer or a mix engineer or even another producer, you can share some reference points with them that help them understand what it is that you're thinking about and where you're going in your head. And the other big example of how references can help is the thing I've said a few times, stopping you going down rabbit holes or round in circles. Because you can realign by listening to something else and remind yourself what you're trying to achieve. So the first thing that matters is choosing the right tracks, and the tracks you choose depends entirely on the purpose that you're going for. So if you're using references to align your ears, then one of the best things you can use is a playlist of music that you know and love, like this one here, which is mine. So you can just stick this playlist on and you know what the tracks are supposed to sound like because you're familiar with them. If you're choosing references for production or mixing, then it's important to choose references that are similar to the style that you're working on. So choose tracks that you admire and look up to as a start point. If your objective is to achieve consistency, then listening to other tracks that you've worked on, particularly those that are finished, will help keep you in the same sort of tonal area and the same sort of style. So if you're putting an EP together, it makes sense to reference other tracks off your own EP. If the objective is to get inspiration, then everything goes out of the window and you can just listen to whatever you want that has something that you find interesting, and that might help you do something cool in your production. And the other big one is trying to see whether you're making progress, and I really advocate this. Saving and bouncing your tracks as you work on them and then listening to that compared to where you are now really helps you make sure that you're going in the right direction and stops you from going down those rabbit holes and going the wrong way. So it's a great idea to save iterations and bounces every 1-2 hours, or at least every day when you're working on something, so that you can step backwards if you need to. One of the things people often say is that they never quite get back to how the demo sounds, so making sure that you've got that saved and bounced out that you can go and reference, and you can figure out what it is about the demo, that's super important. So, now you've chosen your references, how do you actually use them? So the first thing I do when I'm working with any references is I load them into my DAW and I level match them. So let's say we've got 2 references, we have that one there, second reference, and let's say we're using this as the track. So I don't even listen to them, right? I'm going to put them on and I'm going to look at the level meter, and straight away I can see that reference B1 is a load loud. I'm looking at the average volume. So the track that I'm comparing it to is an average of -12. So I'm going to turn my references down using the gain tool so that they are close to there. So that one's coming down -5 and this one's coming down -1.5. Okay, let's try that again. -12, -12, -12. They're pretty close. I mean, that's close enough, right? So we can now listen. So here's one track. Here's another one. sounds louder. Interesting, A2 sounds louder, but it's numerically the same, and in fact numerically possibly slightly quieter. So the next thing I do is make sure I'm listening like for like. So if the tracks have got chill sections and loud sections, I want to line up the loud sections. So like this. This track's got a chill section there. That one's got a chill section there, so I'll line up that chill section. Now I've lined up all the chill sections, I can compare those bits to each other rather than comparing a chill section to a loud section. Using your ears will get you 90% of the way, but you can use tools as well for comparison. And a good example is listening at different frequency bands. So I use this Q3 that I've made. So for example, I want to listen to the sub-frequencies. We can check sub-frequencies, A2, sub-frequencies. So we can hear differences already. No bass line, big bass line. Cool. Same thing applies. We can look in the mid-band. This is really handy, particularly for seeing, for example, if the kick is going through the whole frequency spectrum. We can visually look. If we load up a couple of Q3s, we can overlay one on top of the other. So I can put A2 on here. We're listening to B1, but we're seeing on the red curve A2. So we can note the areas that are a bit different. Now we can take this a step further and use like Match EQ, which is built into Logic. So we can get Match EQ to learn the profile of our target track and then tell us how to make our current track sound like it. So let's learn B2. And then we'll compare it to A1. Okay, match. So if we wanted to get A2 to sound like B1, that's the curve we'd have to put on. Now, I don't ever just apply that curve. This tells me areas I need to work. So if my ears are getting tired and I've lost focus, I can use this visual tool, and it tells me where the areas of difference are. Often this is obviously to do with arrangement, sound choice, etc. It's not always about EQ and tone, but it's just a way of taking you down that road. And particularly if you've got several references and you compare them to one track, then if the Match EQ shows the same thing every time, then that kind of points to you've got a problem in that space. One of the other visual tools is comparing how the waveforms look. So seeing how big the spikes are and seeing how clipped it is. Or, for example, this one at the bottom, there's a lot more average volume than, for example, the one above it, which has got a lot more spikes. So we can see differences between the waveforms that might lead us down a path. So the spikes mean that we've got transients. Again, it's probably due to the way that the track is built and what the sound of the track is. Also handy for checking the volume of quiet sections. You can see this quiet section here is really quiet, whereas in this track it's a bit louder. So if we're mastering here, we'd certainly listen to this and see if it sounded quiet. It certainly looks like it needs to be turned up. The final thing about using references is making sure that you only listen for short amounts of time. Your ears get tired really quickly, and it's important to not overstress them by listening too much. So listen for something and then listen to something else and compare it and keep moving on. So what have I learnt from the last 25 mixes I've worked on? The main thing I've learnt is that getting the right references is critical. So you must be listening to the right thing for the job you have in mind. And if someone sent me a track and the references don't make any sense against the track, they're in a different style, for example, then I'll go back straight away and ask the reasons why. And that brings me on to the second point, knowing what you're listening for. So am I listening to the volume? Am I listening to the way the vocal sounds? Or am I checking out the kick drum? So when I ask people for references, I always ask them to tell me a little bit of narrative about why that reference works for them, what it is about it that they like. And the third thing that matters the most in terms of keeping your creativity and not getting too sucked in by the reference is know when to not use references. These are only a tool and they're there to regain perspective. You shouldn't be using a reference to completely copy it unless you're doing a cover version or a sound alike. So they're only a cue, they are not a framework or a blueprint. So in conclusion, using references in the right way can be huge in improving your mixes and productions. Done properly, references won't make you sound like someone else, they'll help you sound like a better version of yourself. So try incorporating references into your workflow and let me know how you get on in the comments. If you're struggling to hear how your references and your mixes sound, then you might want to check out my video on improving the sound of your room. If you've got your tracks finished and ready to release, then my next video is going to be about ways to release your music. I'll post the links in the description below.